The first thing I noticed outside the church was the cold. Not the kind of cold that came from weather. Even though the November air cut through the torn layers of my dress like thin glass. This was different. This was the cold that arrived when every lie in your life stopped pretending to be warm. Ethan Blackwell did not drag me. He did not touch me more than he had to. He walked half a step ahead, one hand open beside him, as if he was giving me a choice while also knowing I had none. Behind us, the church bells kept ringing. They sounded wrong now. Too bright. Too holy. Too late. A black car waited at the curb with the engine running. The driver did not look back when Ethan opened the door. I stood there on the sidewalk, shaking, my bouquet crushed against my ribs, white roses bent in my fist like they were embarrassed for me. "I am not getting into that car," I said. Ethan looked at the street behind me, then at the church doors, then at me. "Then stand here and let the men your groom invited find you." My throat closed. Daniel would never do that. Ethan reached inside his coat, slowly, making sure I saw every movement. He pulled out a folded packet of papers and held it toward me. "Read the name on page 3. I wanted to throw it back at him. I wanted to scream. I wanted my mother alive, my dress whole, my future simple. Instead, I took the papers with fingers so numb they barely bent. The first page was legal language. The second was numbers. $2 million. Interest. Penalties. Collateral. My eyes moved faster than my mind could understand. Then I saw it. Grace Whitmore. My full name. Typed in black ink like I was not a person. Like I was a property line. Like I was something that could be moved from one man to another with a signature. "That is not my signature," I whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "I know." I looked up at him. "How?" He did not answer right away. A siren cried somewhere far away, then disappeared into the city. "Because Daniel Mercer has used the same notary twice before." My stomach turned. "You knew this and still waited until my wedding?" I did not know he would use the ceremony date as the transfer point. His eyes dropped to the torn edge of my dress. Not in a way that made me feel exposed. In a way that made me feel like the fabric itself had betrayed me. "The device in your hem started transmitting when you reached the altar." The world tilted. For a second, all I could hear was my own breathing. The organ music from inside the church. The soft tick of rain hitting the car roof. "Transfer point," I repeated. The words tasted like metal. Ethan turned the packet to the last page and pointed to one line near the bottom. "Asset transferable after ceremony." I read it once. Then again. The letters stayed the same. I thought of Daniel's smile that morning. The way he had kissed my forehead and told me I looked perfect. The way he had insisted I wear my mother's old dress because family should be honored. The way he had held both my hands and promised that after today, nothing would ever hurt me again. My knees weakened. Ethan stepped closer, but he still did not grab me. "Breathe," he said. I hated that I obeyed him. I hated that the most dangerous man in the city sounded steadier than the man I had almost married. My phone buzzed inside the small satin purse hanging from my wrist. Daniel. His name lit up the screen like a cruel little miracle. I stared at it until my vision blurred. "Answer it," Ethan said. I pressed the phone to my ear. "Daniel." For 3 seconds, there was only static. Then Daniel's voice came through, low and rushed. "Grace, listen to me. Do exactly what they tell you." The bouquet slipped from my hand and hit the wet sidewalk. "Who is they?" Silence. Not long. Just long enough to ruin the last part of me that still believed in him. "I am sorry," Daniel said. Then the line went dead. I lowered the phone. Across the street, 2 dark sport utility vehicles turned the corner without headlights. Ethan opened the car door wider. This time I got in. Not because I trusted him. Because the man I loved had just taught me the difference between heartbreak and danger. As the car pulled away, I looked through the rear window at the church shrinking behind us. I had walked into it as a bride. I left it as collateral. And the worst part was not that Daniel had sold me. The worst part was that Ethan Blackwell had proof before I had courage. The car did not take me to some mansion behind iron gates. That would have made too much sense for a man people feared. Instead, Ethan Blackwell took me to an old hotel on the edge of downtown Boston, 12 stories of brick, brass, and rain-streaked windows, the kind of place that looked closed to the public but not abandoned. The sign above the awning said the Marlowe in faded gold letters. My mother used to mention that name when I was little. Not often, only when she thought I was asleep. The driver pulled into a side entrance beside a loading dock, and no one spoke until the steel door shut behind us. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner, old wood, and electricity. Two men in dark coats stood near the elevator, but they stepped back when Ethan looked at them. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Power moved around him before he moved at all. I held the packet of papers against my chest like it could keep me from falling apart. "Where are we?" I asked. "A place Daniel does not own." "That is not an answer." Ethan pressed the elevator button. "It is the only answer that matters tonight." I wanted to hate him for that. For being calm. For knowing more about my life than I did. For standing there in his black suit, while my wedding dress hung uneven around my legs, and my future bled quietly into the floor. The elevator opened into a private suite that looked untouched by time. Dark green walls. Heavy curtains. A fireplace that had not been lit. A table set with water, towels, and a first aid kit, though I was not hurt in any way that cotton could fix. Ethan pointed toward a bedroom door. "There are clothes inside. A phone on the desk. Call anyone you trust." I laughed once, but it came out broken. I was supposed to trust Daniel. His eyes softened for half a second. Then it was gone. "Then call someone who knew you before him." I thought of my mother, so suddenly it hurt. Caroline Whitmore. Her hands always smelled like flowers and vanilla soap. She had been gone since I was 16, taken by a highway accident so ordinary that no one ever questioned it. Bad weather. Bad tires. Bad luck. That was what they told me. I walked past Ethan into the bedroom, not because I obeyed him, but because I needed four walls between me and the truth. The room was simple. A navy sweater. Gray sweatpants. White socks folded on the bed. Nothing expensive. Nothing intimate. On the dresser sat a silver frame, turned face down. I do not know why I picked it up. Maybe because grief makes the hand reach before the mind can stop it. The photograph inside was old, its corners yellowed. A young woman stood outside a flower shop, smiling into the sun. Beside her stood a boy of maybe 12, pale, serious, with dark hair and eyes too old for his face. My breath left me. The woman was my mother. Younger. Alive. Wearing the same heart-shaped locket I still kept in a box at my apartment. I backed into the dresser, and the frame shook in my hands. Ethan appeared in the doorway, but did not come closer. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. His gaze moved to the photograph. For the first time since he had stepped into the church, he looked less like a king and more like a man facing a grave. "She gave it to me." "You knew my mother?" "Yes." The room seemed to shrink around that one word. I shook my head. "No. She worked at a flower shop. She made soup when neighbors were sick. She cried during old movies. She did not know men like you." Ethan took a slow breath. "She knew one boy like me." My fingers tightened around the frame. Why did Daniel have my name on that contract? Ethan looked at me, and his voice dropped low enough to make the silence listen. "Because your mother left something behind, Grace. And Daniel married you to find it." I stared at him, cold all the way through. Then he said the name my mother used only when I had nightmares, the name no one else in the world knew. Little May. The frame slipped from my hands onto the carpet, and nothing in me stayed standing. The name hit harder than the truth. Little May. My mother had called me that when I was small enough to believe storms could be chased away by warm milk and a hand on my hair. She said I had been born in May, stubborn as spring, always reaching for light even when the sky turned gray. Daniel never knew that name. My father who raised me never used it. I had never written it down, never said it out loud, never given it to anyone. Yet Ethan Blackwell stood in the doorway of an old hotel suite and spoke it like he had carried it for years. I sat on the edge of the bed because my legs could not be trusted. The photograph lay face up on the carpet between us, my mother smiling beside a boy who looked like he had already learned not to ask the world for mercy. "Tell me everything," I said. My voice sounded small, but it did not break. Ethan entered slowly, as if the room belonged to my grief, and he was only a guest in it. He picked up the frame, placed it on the dresser, then turned it toward me. "Your mother worked at a flower shop, yes. But before that, she kept books for my father." I stared at him. "Accounting books?" "Not the kind you file with the Internal Revenue Service." His answer was quiet. "Clean. Terrible." Rain tapped against the window like fingers asking to be let in. Somewhere below us, an elevator hummed. Ethan stood 6 feet away, hands at his sides, giving me space that felt more respectful than any comfort Daniel had ever offered. "Caroline found records," he continued. "Names. Payments. Transfers. Enough to expose people who had built their lives on clean suits and dirty money. Your family? I asked. His jaw moved once. Some of them. That honesty made me look up. He did not protect himself from the answer. He did not dress it in excuses. My father wanted the records buried. Your mother wanted them turned over. She was not powerful, Grace, but she had the kind of courage powerful men hate. My chest tightened. Then why did she stay near you? Ethan looked at the photograph again. Because I was 12, and she knew I was not my father yet. Not yet. Those two words stayed in the air. I thought of the boy in the picture. Serious eyes. Small shoulders. A child inside a house where men whispered and women learned which doors not to open. She helped me get out one night when a meeting turned dangerous, he said. She hid me in the back of her flower van under buckets of lilies. I remember the smell. Sweet. Too sweet. I hated lilies for years after that. I almost smiled. Almost. Then the memory changed shape. The accident, I whispered. Ethan did not answer quickly enough. That was answer enough. It was not bad weather, I said. No bad tires. No bad luck. His eyes met mine. Your mother did not believe in luck. She believed in evidence. The room went still. I pressed both hands against my mouth, not to cry, but to keep something inside me from coming apart too loudly. All those years I had visited a grave with grocery store flowers. All those years I had forgiven the world because I thought it had only been careless. It had not been careless. It had been afraid of her. What did she leave behind? I asked. Ethan reached into his coat and placed a clear evidence bag on the desk. Inside was the small black device he had removed from my dress at the church. Beside it, another bag held a tiny strip of metal, thin as a fingernail clipping. This came from your hem, he said. The tracker was new. The metal was not. I stood slowly. The room tilted, but I stayed upright. Daniel chose the dress. Yes. He said it would honor her. He lied. The words were simple. They were also final. I remembered Daniel holding the old garment bag in my apartment, smiling with soft eyes, telling me my mother would have wanted this. I had believed him because grief is a door, and the right voice can walk through it pretending to be love. Ethan pointed to the metal strip. It is part of a safe deposit key. Your mother hid it where only you would one day find it. I looked at the torn fabric pooled near my feet. White lace. Broken thread. A ruined promise. He married me for the dress, I said. Ethan's voice lowered. No, Grace. He married you because he thought the dress would lead him to what your mother died protecting. I touched the place where the hem had been, cut open, and felt the last soft thread give beneath my fingers. That was when I understood. My wedding had never been a beginning. It had been a search warrant disguised as love. Daniel came back just before midnight, when the hotel had gone so quiet that every sound felt borrowed from another life. I was sitting by the window in Ethan's navy sweater, my wedding dress folded across the chair like a witness that refused to leave. The torn hem faced upward. Inside it, the empty seam looked almost innocent. That was the worst part. Lies usually do. A soft knock came at the suite door. Not the hard knock of men with orders. Not the careful tap of hotel staff. This one was familiar. 2 short knocks, 1 pause, 1 more. Daniel. My body knew him before my mind allowed it. Ethan was standing near the desk, reading something from one of his men, but he looked up the moment my breathing changed. He did not ask who it was. He already knew. Do not open it, he said. I stood anyway. Grace. His voice was low, warning without command. I hated that I wanted to hear Daniel explain. I hated that some broken piece of me still wanted the man at the door to be the man from yesterday morning. The one who had kissed my forehead under a veil and promised me peace. I walked to the door and opened it with the chain still fastened. Daniel stood in the hallway wearing his wedding suit, wrinkled now, rain dark at the shoulders, his blonde hair falling across his forehead. His eyes were red. His hands were raised like he had come to surrender. Grace, he breathed. Thank God. The sound of my name in his mouth almost hurt more than the papers had. Do not say that, I whispered. Please, let me explain. You call me collateral. He flinched. I never wanted this. Then what did you want? His eyes moved past me into the room. They found Ethan, and fear crossed his face so quickly that I almost missed it. Almost. He is lying to you, Daniel said. Everything he told you is part of a game. He needs what your mother hid, and he is using you to get it. Ethan did not move. That made Daniel speak faster. Your mother was afraid of him. Grace. She told my father things. She knew the Blackwells were dangerous. That is why she ran. My fingers tightened around the door edge. He knew exactly where to press. My mother. My fear. My need for one clean answer. Why did you choose my dress? I asked. Daniel swallowed. Because I thought it would comfort you. Why was there a tracker in it? I did not put that there. Why was my name on a debt contract? My father handled the paperwork. I signed things I did not understand. The excuses came smooth, polished, almost warm. Lawyer words. Husband words. Words designed to make a woman doubt her own eyes. Behind me, Ethan finally spoke. Ask him about the policy. Daniel went still. I turned my head slightly. What policy? Ethan stepped closer, but not to me. To the table. He picked up a document and laid it where I could see it. 2 weeks ago, Daniel purchased a life insurance policy in your name. The hallway seemed to stretch. Daniel's face lost color. That was for our future, he said quickly. Married people do that. For $5 million? Ethan asked. Silence answered first. Then Daniel looked at me, and for the first time that night, his mask slipped. Not all the way. Just enough. Enough for me to see calculation beneath sorrow. Grace, you have to understand. My father was going to destroy me. I stared at him. So you offered him me? I thought I could control it. You thought you could control what happened to my life. My voice did not rise. It became smaller, sharper. You stood beside me in a church and waited for men to come collect your solution. Daniel reached toward the gap in the door, but the chain held. I love you. Those 3 words had once been a home. Now they sounded like a receipt. I looked at Ethan. He was silent, watching me as if the next choice had to belong to me or it would mean nothing. So I turned back to Daniel. No, I said. You loved what I carried without knowing it. Daniel's eyes hardened then, just for a second, and that second saved me from every memory that had begged for mercy. You do not know what kind of man he is, Daniel whispered. I looked at the torn dress behind me, the documents. On the table, the photograph of my mother, and the door chain between us. Maybe not, I said, but I finally know what kind of man you are. Then I closed the door on my almost husband, and the sound was softer than heartbreak should have been. After Daniel left, the room did not feel safer. It felt cleaner, and sometimes clean things hurt more because there is nothing left to blame but the truth. I stood by the door with my hand still on the chain, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. For almost 2 years, I had known the rhythm of those steps. I knew how they sounded crossing my apartment floor, moving through grocery aisles, coming up behind me in the kitchen when he wanted to kiss the top of my head and make me believe I had finally been chosen gently. Now that same sound moved away from me, and I understood that familiar does not always mean safe. Ethan said nothing. He let the silence do what silence does best. It showed me what I had been refusing to hear. I walked back to the chair where my wedding dress waited, folded like a soft white wound. The hem Ethan had opened in the church was ragged now, lace and thread separated with careful force. I touched the fabric and remembered my mother's hands guiding mine over a sewing needle when I was 9 years old. Small stitches, she used to say, hold better than pretty ones. I had forgotten that until the words came back, so clearly I almost turned, expecting her to be in the room. There is more inside, I said. Ethan looked up. Grace. No. Daniel came here because he thinks we found everything. I lifted the dress. It was heavier than it should have been. Not much. Just enough for memory to become evidence. But my mother never hid things where people expected them. Ethan crossed the room and placed a small sewing kit on the table. He did not offer to do it for me. I noticed that. Maybe power was not always taking over. Maybe sometimes it was knowing when to step back. My hands shook as I turned the bodice inside out. The hotel light fell across the satin lining, yellow and tired. For several minutes, there was nothing but thread, fabric, and my breathing. Then I saw it. One seam near the waist had been stitched by hand. Not factory perfect. Small. Uneven. Familiar. My mother's stitches. I sat down before my knees could fail me. Ethan moved closer, but stopped when I raised my hand. Let me, I whispered. The first thread snapped softly beneath the tiny scissors. Then another. Then another. A narrow pocket opened beneath the lining. Inside was a flat square wrapped in clear plastic, no bigger than a credit card. My name was written across it in blue ink. Not Grace. Little May. The room blurred. I held the packet against my chest for a second before I opened it. Inside was a folded letter, thin from age, and a second strip of metal that matched the first. Together, They formed a complete key. I should have looked at the key. I looked at the letter. My mother's handwriting leaned slightly to the right, the way it always did on birthday cards and grocery lists. My dearest May, if you are reading this, then someone has mistaken your kindness for weakness. I am sorry I could not give you a simpler life. I am sorrier that the truth found you anyway. Do not let angry men teach you to become cruel. Do not let charming men teach you to become small. What I left behind is not for revenge. It is for daylight. Use it only when you are ready to stand where everyone can see you. By the time I finished, I was crying without sound. Ethan had turned away toward the window, one hand pressed against the frame. His reflection in the glass looked older than before. She wrote about you, I said. He did not turn. What did she say? I swallowed hard and read the last line. The Blackwell boy is not his father yet. If he ever finds you, make him prove he chose differently. Ethan closed his eyes. Just once. Just long enough for me to see that the sentence had reached a place no bullet ever could. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the completed key. My mother had not left me a weapon. She had left me a standard. And now both men, the one who betrayed me and the one who protected me, would have to answer to it. By dawn, I had stopped looking like a bride and started looking like a woman who had survived the idea of one. The dress was no longer perfect. The hem was torn. The waist had been opened and stitched back badly with thread from the hotel sewing kit. I should have changed out of it. Ethan told me I could. There were clean clothes in the bedroom, a coat, shoes, everything practical. But when I looked at the dress hanging over the chair, wounded and honest, I knew I was not finished with it. I am wearing it, I said. Ethan stood beside the desk, the completed key resting between us. Where we are going, men will mistake that for weakness. Good, I said. Let them start by being wrong. He studied me for a long moment. Not like Daniel used to study me, searching for the easiest place to bend me. Ethan looked at me like he was measuring the cost of letting me choose. Then he nodded once. Then we do it your way. The safe deposit box was not in a marble bank downtown. My mother had known better than that. It was in a private storage office 20 miles outside Boston, beside a highway exit, behind a laundromat and a closed tax service. Ordinary. Forgettable. Perfect. Ethan's men waited outside. Ethan came in with me, but he stayed 2 steps behind. The clerk barely looked at us until I placed the key on the counter. Then his face changed. Not much. Just enough. He disappeared into the back and returned with a flat metal box, gray, dusty, and heavier than memory should be. My hands trembled when I opened it. Inside was a ledger, 3 flash drives, photographs, and a small stack of documents sealed in plastic. No jewels. No cash. No dramatic treasure. Just paper. Names. Dates. Account numbers. The quiet shape of crimes committed by men who smiled in public. I saw Mercer on one page. Then Blackwell on another. Ethan saw it too. His silence changed. It became sharper. You knew this might happen, I said. I knew she had evidence, he answered. I did not know whose names survived. Including yours? His eyes did not move from the page. Including my father's. Including men who still sit at my table. There it was. The line between protection and power. Between the man who had saved me and the empire that had raised him. I closed the box. Then your table needs better men. For the first time, Ethan almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was true. By nightfall, I walked into a private dining room above an Italian restaurant in the north and wearing my ruined wedding dress under a black wool coat. Daniel was there. So was his father, Richard Mercer, with silver hair, a senator's smile, and eyes that did not recognize ordinary people as fully real. Around the table sat men who had spent their lives teaching the world to lower its voice. When I entered, they all looked at the dress first. Then at me. Daniel stood halfway. Grace, you should not be here. I placed my mother's letter on the table. Then the ledger. Then the forged contract with my name on it. You are right, I said. I should have been on a honeymoon tonight. No one laughed. Richard Mercer leaned back, calm as church stone. Young lady, you are confused. I looked at him and felt my fear arrive. Then leave. No, I said. I was confused when I called betrayal love. This is clarity. Daniel whispered my name like a warning. Ethan moved behind me, but I raised one hand without looking back. He stopped. That mattered more than any promise. I faced the room alone. My mother died protecting the truth, I said. I will not spend my life protecting your lie. And for the first time all night, the powerful men at that table had nothing ready to say. Richard Mercer did not raise his voice. Men like him rarely did. They built rooms where other people raised theirs first, then called it proof of weakness. He looked at the ledger, at my mother's letter, at the contract with my forged name, and smiled like a man watching a child spill water on an expensive rug. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "you have been through a distressing evening. No one here wants to add to that." I stood at the end of the table with my hands resting on the back of an empty chair. The torn lace at my wrist brushed against the polished wood. I could feel Daniel staring at me, begging without words, but I did not look at him. Some faces become dangerous when you remember loving them. "Do not make this about my feelings," I said. "That is what men do when they cannot argue with evidence." A few eyes shifted. "Not much." "Enough." Richard's smile thinned. "Evidence is a serious word. So is fraud." I placed the insurance policy beside the contract. "So is coercion. So is obstruction." Daniel sat down slowly, as if the air had become too heavy to stand in. Ethan remained behind me, silent. His silence was not absence. It was a wall. Still, I knew the truth on the table had cut toward him too. My mother's ledger did not separate monsters from powerful men as neatly as I wanted. It named Mercer accounts, shell companies, judges, brokers, police contacts, and Blackwell holdings from years before Ethan took control. Some were old sins. Some had living signatures. Richard noticed where my eyes went. Then his gaze moved past me to Ethan. "This is unfortunate," he said, "but not irreparable. Your father understood that certain records are better left buried." Ethan's voice came cold from behind my shoulder. "My father is dead. His debts are not." The room changed. It was almost invisible, but I felt it. Chairs settling. Breaths held. Men realizing the conversation had shifted from me to the empire behind me. Richard leaned forward. "If that ledger leaves this room, it does not only damage my family. It opens doors you have spent a decade keeping closed. Banks, judges, federal agencies, old partners with long memories. You protect her tonight, and by morning you may have protected yourself out of a kingdom." No one spoke. Even the city outside seemed to quiet against the restaurant windows. I turned to Ethan then. I had not meant to. I wanted to stay brave, facing forward. But courage is not pretending the cost is small. He looked at the ledger, then at the letter my mother had written. The line was still visible beneath the lamplight. Make him prove he chose differently. His face gave away nothing. That was how he had survived. That was also what my mother had asked him to outgrow. "You do not have to do this for me," I said. "I know," he answered. "Then why?" For the first time that night, Ethan looked tired. Not weak, just human. Because she was right about me before I deserved it. Richard laughed softly. "Sentiment will ruin you." Ethan picked up the ledger. Every man at the table watched his hand. He did not tear it. He did not hide it inside his coat. He placed it into a plain envelope and handed it to Marco, the gray-haired man waiting near the door. Federal Courier. Directly to the attorney named in Caroline Whitmore's letter. Full chain of custody. Tonight. Marco nodded and left. Richard's smile disappeared. Daniel whispered, "Ethan, think." Ethan looked at him once. I did. Then he turned to me. Not possessive, not triumphant, just present. The kind of present that asks nothing and changes everything. In that moment, I understood something my mother had tried to teach me from beyond the grave. A man does not become different because he says he is sorry. He becomes different when the truth costs him power, and he lets it live anyway. By the time the federal agents arrived, Richard Mercer had stopped smiling. That was the first punishment I saw, and maybe the quietest. No raised voices. No broken glass. No dramatic confession. Just men in dark coats entering through the private stairwell while the restaurant downstairs kept serving pasta, wine, and birthday cake to people who had no idea a family empire was ending above them. Richard stood when they said his name. Daniel did not. He looked smaller in his wedding suit than he had in the church, as if every lie had been holding his shoulders up and now the weight was finally gone. For 1 second, his eyes found mine. There was apology there. Fear too. Maybe even regret. But regret is not the same as repair. I had learned that before midnight. "Grace," he said softly. I waited for my heart to answer him. It did not. "I hope one day you understand," he whispered. I looked at the torn sleeve of my dress, at the thread my hands had pulled open, at the place where my mother had hidden daylight inside white silk. "I do understand," I said. That is why I am not coming with you. An agent guided him toward the door. He went without fighting. That almost made it worse. Evil was easier to hate when it looked like a monster. Daniel looked like a man who had convinced himself. Love could survive any betrayal as long as he sounded sorry afterward. When the room emptied, only Ethan and I remained with the documents that no longer belonged to either of us. Outside, Boston was waking into a pale winter morning. The rain had stopped. Wet streets held the first gray light, and somewhere below, a delivery truck backed into an alley with 3 sharp beeps that sounded almost ordinary. I had never been so grateful for ordinary. Ethan walked me back to the Marlowe without his men crowding close. The city had changed in the space of one night, or maybe I had. Storefronts looked sharper. Traffic lights glowed brighter. Even my ruined dress felt different under the black coat. Not shameful, not tragic. Evidence. At the hotel, I folded it carefully and placed my mother's letter on top. Then I slept for 14 hours without dreaming of churches, contracts, or Daniel's voice. Months passed before I saw Ethan again. Real months. Not the kind stories skip because healing is not pretty enough. There were interviews with attorneys. Statements to federal investigators. Long mornings when I could not drink coffee without shaking. Afternoons when I stood inside my apartment and realized every object Daniel had touched felt like someone else's property. I moved out. I sold what I could. I kept only my mother's locket, her letter, and the dress. Then, in the spring, I reopened her flower shop in a narrow brick storefront in Beacon Hill, 12 blocks from where she had once sold lilies to strangers and courage to a boy named Ethan Blackwell. I named it Caroline's. On the first Friday of May, the bell above the door rang at closing time. Ethan stood there without bodyguards, wearing a dark coat and holding a small velvet box. My chest tightened before I could stop it. He saw that and placed the box on the counter without opening it. It is not what you think, he said. Inside was my wedding ring, the one Daniel had chosen, the one I had thrown into a drawer at the Marlowe and forgotten. Ethan had cleaned it, but he had not made it shine enough to lie. I thought you should decide what happens to it, he said. I picked it up and felt nothing. That was how I knew I was free. I dropped it into an empty flower pot beside the register. Then it can help hold up something alive. Ethan looked at the pot, then at me, and the smallest smile touched his mouth. Not victory, not possession, relief. Why come back? I asked. He looked around the shop, at the buckets of roses, the handwritten prices, the morning light caught in glass vases. Because your mother saved my life once, he said. And you made me want to become worthy of the second one. I did not run to him. He did not reach for me. We stood on opposite sides of the counter, with flowers between us, and the past finally quiet. That was enough for the beginning. I used to think power was a man in a black suit making the room go silent. Now I know better. Power is a woman telling the truth with shaking hands. Power is choosing daylight after someone dressed darkness like love. And sometimes, power is planting the ring that once trapped you in the soil, then watching something honest grow from it.